Good morning, everybody. Well, it might be afternoon by the time you're seeing this. My name is Dr. Jenny Doke-Kerns, and I'm the Director of Academic Services for the Newton campus. And your instructor asked me to chat with those of you in the court reporting program to talk a little bit about test anxiety and getting your head in the right place when it's time to do those hard tests. I really enjoy talking to your group about this because I feel like if you're going to talk about high stakes testing, like make it or break it testing, that's you guys. And I can only imagine how incredibly challenging it is to be timed and be assessed constantly and have to perform. So I guess what I'm saying is, you know, I'll explain it in a bit, but I've spent some time researching test anxiety, and you guys are the perfect people to be talking about this. So just a little bit about my own background and what I do here at DMAC. This is also a plug for the Academic Achievement Center. So part of my role as Director of Academic Services here is to oversee our library, our testing center, the high school completion program, our English as a second language program, and our academic achievement center. Now, I know right now in the time of COVID and this very, very odd situation we find ourselves in, accessing the services that the college offers is much, much harder. And in fact, a lot of students, I think, don't realize that many of the services that we've always had are still available to you, but they might look a little bit different. So just know that we do have, still have tutoring available for students. Mostly it is, well, it's all online. And if you go to the Newton DMAC website, there is a, in fact, I'm going to show you really quick. I'm going to show you. So I'm going to share a screen here. I'm going to pop back and forth. We're going to keep this pretty casual today. So if I'm on the internet, this will take just a minute for that to pop up for us. If I'm on the internet, let me go back to DMAC's website. So I'm going to start off at the very, very beginning of DMAC's website here. Okay. So at the main website, dmacc.edu, if you go all the way down to the bottom, you find the campuses over here. You can click on Newton and go down here just a little bit, and you have all kinds of different things detailing the services available at the Newton campus. And one of them over here is the Academic Achievement Center. So if you click on that, scroll down here just a little bit, and it tells you a little bit about how we're going to be doing services this semester. And like I said, all tutoring is actually virtual right now, so it's kind of would be a Zoom conversation like this if it were two-way. Now, we have two different levels, I guess you could say, of assistance available. I thought it was really important to have some of our Newton-based tutors and instructors specifically there to serve Newton students, because I think when things all go back to normal, it'd be really nice to continue to have that relationship with our instructors. And some of you have already developed those relationships as well. So as you can see, we don't have quite the amount of hours that we used to, but we do have some more flexibility. We used to only have tutoring during the day, and now we do have some in the evening as well. So if you look, on Tuesdays, we have a big chunk of different instructors available. So 11 to 2, you can go into this one, and that's math, general, if you're thinking need help with writing. HiSET is that high school completion program I told you about. But anybody who's doing general would be a really good help if you're just working on an assignment and you just need a little bit of help with that. Again, going forward here, we've got writing and basic grammar. That would also work for business grammar and things like that, business writing. And, but just as you can see, there's a wide variety of times. Math, general, on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 5 to 9. So that's a nice person. And that instructor has taught some English classes and has taught some math classes as well. And her emphasis is in math. So a great resource if you find yourself needing those kinds of services. But I understand that does not necessarily cover everybody's needs, just because there are very specific times. So we did also link here to other DMAC tutoring centers. Right now, with the way that this works, with it all being virtual, it doesn't matter if you decide to connect with Urban and have um, one of their tutors work for you, if that's okay with you. We are all, this really has emphasized how much we are all one big family in this. So if Newton doesn't have services available for you at the time that you are available, I would highly recommend checking these other areas throughout the district and logging on and seeing, you know, if they can help you when you need it. So just so you know, we do still have these services and they're extremely important. One other thing that while we're on the website that I will show you, one of my other roles here is I am the campus liaison for for disability services. And what that means is if you've had accommodations in the past or currently do, I'm the person that you work with to help make sure that those come into play in your classes. I don't grant the accommodations. And if you don't know what that is, it's kind of like, I know people use different words for it. So for instance, if you had an IEP or a 504 plan in high school, maybe for anxiety or a reading disability or, you know, a visual disability, something like that, you probably had certain accommodations that helped you be successful. The same thing is possible in college. And the important thing is that you go through the process and apply. So if you go all the way down, again, to the bottom here, here you click on disability services over here. And you come to this page, and right here on the side, it says application for accommodation. Now this would be I can help you with this process, but this is kind of, I don't grant the accommodations, I just help you with them once you get them. So you kind of do this first, and then those accommodations are granted, or there's questions, and then we go forward from there. But this just is gonna ask you for your general information, what area you're studying, what campus you're mostly based in, and then like, what is your disability? So one of the three things that's important to look at here and to show is how would you describe your issue, the problem that you're having? Then how does it affect your daily life and your academics? So that's the second part here. And then the third part is, how can we help you with that then? Is it helpful? Do you need do you need the instructor PowerPoints? I know a lot of them share them already, but sometimes just to make sure that you get those. Do you need a digital recorder? Do you need a note taker? Things like that, okay? So again, what's the problem you're having? How is it affecting you? And then what would be helpful going forward to make that you feel would help you be more successful. One important part of this also is they do ask that you provide some kind of documentation. So if you have even if it's out of date, an IEP or a 504 from when you were in high school, most of the time that's completely sufficient. And you can share that. Also, if you don't have that available, or this is a new issue that you're looking at, often a letter from a doctor or a certified therapist detailing exactly what we just talked about. What is the problem you're having? How is it affecting you? How are they seeing it manifest itself in your treatment? And then what would be helpful going forward? So I know that's not exactly what we're talking about today as far as test anxiety, but I do think it's important that we do everything we can to connect you with the services that are available to you on campus right now. So that being said, let's get started talking about test anxiety. So working in the Academic Achievement Center, and I started there about 7 years ago, basically I kind of was there to help students with whatever problems they were having. And in my past life, before being at DMAC, I was a DMAC English professor and Academic Achievement Center group leader. But before that, I was a high school English teacher for almost 14 years. And so I have had lots and lots of years in education, 20 years in education this year. And I've seen students struggle in many, many different ways. But one of the things I was absolutely taken aback by was the frequency that students came in and said, I don't test well. I have severe anxiety. It's driving me crazy. And honestly, that was kind of a new thing for me. So I decided, I personally had not really experienced that a lot. And again, being an English teacher, I didn't have a lot of high stakes tests. I was more of a writing teacher. And so there wasn't a lot I sprang on students. We worked toward things, did drafts, did a final draft, so on and so forth. So anyway, but then I started researching test anxiety, and it became a real focus for me until eventually I put together this presentation or different modifications of it. And I started presenting this, and I presented it at multiple places nationally. But I also just make sure to get around DMAC and talk to our students, because that to me is what's most important. So you have to forgive me on this if I get rambling. I have given this presentation in a 15-minute period, and I've given it in a 90-minute period. So it can be a little bit fluid. So bear with me. This is the first time I've recorded it. So here we go together. Okay. You know, I told you I talked to multiple places about, even outside of DMAC, about this. So I always like to share a little bit about DMAC. I'm definitely drinking the Kool-Aid where it comes to DMAC. I started my own education at DMAC as a first-generation college student, as a single parent after my first year. And if it wasn't for DMAC, I would not have been able to get the education I have. And again, now I have 2 masters and a PhD, and none of that would have been possible if a community college had not been accessible to me. So I really, really think that what we're doing here is important. So don't downplay the work you're doing at DMAC, because it can lead to amazing things. So I always tell people that I'm from Iowa, and they picture cornfields. I'm like, no, this is my neighborhood. It doesn't always look the way that, you know, we think it does. And I love to tell people about Ragbri, and they just don't get it. But some of them do, some of them don't. But so that's a little bit about me too as well. And then I live very close to a lot of great women. That's my my mom, my grandmother, and my 2 aunts, and we have a lot of fun together. So what are we going to talk about today that isn't just about what Jenny likes to do for fun? Basically, we're talking a little bit about what anxiety is, how do we lessen that test anxiety, what to do on test day, and then strategies for specific test formats. Now, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that, because quite honestly, I think it's the least important part of what we're talking about. I think mindset is very much an important part of it. But I'm going to assume, yes, we're going to talk about the kind of testing you do in court reporting, but I am also keeping this about testing in general, because I know that it's at some point in your academic career, even now, you are taking other kinds of tests as well. So whatever is applicable here will be applicable in those other places. So, and I'm not going to make you guys do clearly the little activities, but, and I get to answer some of these questions for you since it's this format. But when I talk to students about how do you see test anxiety manifesting itself, a lot of them will say like the physical things. You may look agitated. Your breathing may become faster. You might even be shaky. Or I have students who say, I break out in a cold sweat. So this is exactly the kinds of things that any kind of anxiety would produce. Now let's be really clear though. There's nothing wrong with a little anxiety. I know a lot of students who think, oh, this stresses me out, therefore I have anxiety. It's okay to be stressed out sometimes. If you walk into a test and you have 0 anxiety, you're probably not going to perform at your best. So there's the healthy level of anxiety that just kind of keeps us on our game. And then there's that level of anxiety that is detrimental to our game. And that's what we kind of want to counteract today a little bit. And I think it's important, you know, the second question is, well, which students actually usually get help? And often it would be students who have accommodations or things like that. But what I find, a lot of the students that report the most test anxiety are actually extremely high performing students. And you can have students that have accommodations or learning disability and still be completely high performing students. So don't get me wrong there. I'm just saying that sometimes it's not the student that we would assume needs this special services. And not only that, again, most students have never actually been taught formal testing strategies. And that's unfortunate because, and we say, but the kids have been testing, students have been testing since the early part of their educational careers. So they know how to do this. But what if you've been doing it wrong the whole time? What if you've been repeating the same kinds of bad habits, both physically and mentally, as you go into testing? So I think it's important that every student has some time to learn and actually be taught some of these strategies, both mental and again, process-wise, as to how to approach testing. So I told you before that I didn't have a lot of anxiety about testing myself. So I had a little trouble empathizing with my students at first, but then I just kept seeing it over and over again and clearly saying, this is very, very real. So I had to think to myself, what is something that gives me anxiety that other people don't necessarily understand. And immediately I thought about flying. This is a great example of something that I have had to force myself to overcome and get good at, even though I will never love it. Okay. Because when I think about flying, you know, a lot of people, they say, oh my gosh, you know, they see a picture like this and it's being transported to somewhere amazing and wonderful and everything else and a vacation. And for me, it's this. Okay. It's better now, but literally I didn't get on an airplane until I was 36 years old. And it was because I was terrified of it. And I had opportunities. I had an aunt and uncle that lived in Hawaii when I was in high school. My sister would go visit. They would offer to pay for it. I was terrified. I didn't see the ocean until right before I turned 40 years old. But eventually I got to the point where I could see that this was really limiting me. I missed opportunities to go to professional conferences. I had the chance to go to Ireland with my aunts and some of those ladies that were in that picture I showed you before. That would have been an amazing experience. And I passed on all of them because I was scared. And so basically I ended up saying, no, I'm going to get on a plane. I'm going to go. It was a white knuckle ride the whole time, but it was fine. And the more I did it, the easier it got. And I can literally say that one of the biggest things that I miss right now during this time of COVID and all this change is I was getting to the point where I was traveling to represent DMAC, both lobbying in DC and at different conferences and to visit friends 4 or 5 times a year. And I miss that now so incredibly much. It doesn't mean I love the plane ride, but I miss the traveling and the amazing learning that I've done in all that time. So I guess what I would say is I can kind of liken this to this process. You're never maybe going to love testing, but you can figure out how to get through it so you can do what you need to do and go ahead and kick butt. Okay, so test anxiety, who is affected? Students at all levels, like I said before, especially though often non-traditional students. And when I say non-traditional students, the cool thing about DMAC is there almost isn't a traditional student anymore. Yes, we have what are called the traditional students where, you know, you have somebody graduate high school, they go straight into school the next year, that they don't have a child, they're not married, all those things. And that's great. And, you know, we love having those students, of course. But we also have a lot of students who decide later in life, even if it's a couple of years, that, you know what, making $12 an hour sounded great when I got out of high school, but now as I get older and I'm raising kids or I want more for myself, that I'm ready to go back and get a skill or change the direction my life is going in, which is so great and so brave and so amazing. And harder in a lot of ways because you've been away from academics for a little while and you have to go back in and things change. So, and that goes along with students experiencing new platforms. And what does that mean? Well, it's students who are, maybe you're using Blackboard or you're using all the things that we've had to use this year, like Zoom and Teams and all that great stuff, and you've never done it before in your life. I know many of us have had this kind of a technological, like crash course literally in this year. I know I did. I had to figure out how Teams worked so that I could work with my staff, and I had about 48 hours to do it this spring. So I can empathize with you a lot. But that can often be really hard for students. If not only are you learning to be a student again and do homework and do all those things, but by the way, why don't you go ahead and learn how to do Blackboard and Zoom and all these things. So anytime you're having experience a whole new platform, a whole new learning management system, it can be really, really difficult. And of course, what are the effects of this? Students who experience high levels of anxiety in the classroom or in testing definitely have diminished achievement. You're not going to do as well as you normally do. You can have those physical symptoms we talked about, heart racing, you know, breathing elevated, all those different things. And that clearly is going to affect how you're doing. And then when students internalize this and they say, oh my gosh, I can't even do the regular stuff and everybody else looks like they're doing fine and all that, then that can result in lower self-esteem. And of course, if you have that lower self-esteem, then the chances of you having anxiety the next time this rolls around is even higher. So it's kind of like a self-perpetuating cycle, and which can, of course, as you can imagine, then lead to lower completion rates. Because, and again, I keep saying this, but so much of this is mindset. So much of this is how you see yourself in the classroom and as a student. You know, my provost, Joe DeHart, said something that really, really resonated with me, because I remember this when I was a first generation college student, first year student going to college, it being very foreign to me. Joe said, you know, there are a lot of students that are walking around our halls believing that they don't really belong here, and they're just looking for evidence that that's true. And I know I felt that way all the time. And I will tell you, if you think that difficulty or anxiety or the fact that you don't feel like you get it as much as everyone else, everyone is feeling that. It's not just you. So it's incredibly important to keep that in mind as we go forward. And again, I talked a little bit about the fact that accommodations are available. And we can talk about that. You're welcome to reach out to me if you'd like. And then going on, just that idea of subject-specific anxiety. I have a lot of students who really struggle with math, or they really struggle with essay writing, and that really just drives them up the wall. So I completely get that, and we work with students with those kinds of things all the time. I know, speaking to court reporting students in the past, they've talked about those time tests you have. I almost consider you guys a subject-specific as well. I mean, I really do, because your situation is so different. This idea that you have to go ready, set, perform, and then you're timed, and it's right at this moment, and you're performing with all these other people there. That's serious stuff, and more power to you, because that really is a different situation than most of our students find themselves in. Okay, so how do we lessen that test anxiety? First of all, preparation, okay? And this is one thing I say, and I feel really, really strongly about. Of the students that come in to me and say, I'm a bad tester, I have test anxiety, and it's affecting my performance. Let's say that's this many students, okay? I would say in reality, this many students, half of them maybe, have serious test anxiety and that sort of thing. These students are not studying correctly. And that's really, really a big deal. If you are not ready, if you haven't mastered the material when you get to the test, you shouldn't perform well. A true, accurate test needs you to have mastery of the material for you to be successful, you know, to whatever level is necessary. So a lot of students think they're testing poorly, but actually they're studying poorly. So it's really important to talk about study skills. And I'd be more than happy to come back to you guys and get a little bit more into that. That's something we talk about a lot in the Academic Achievement Center. You know, how are you reading notes? Are you taking notes and then revisiting them? When you get, one of the bad things I think about getting PowerPoints from your instructors is we get that PowerPoint and we go, oh, I got it, cool. But it's a different process when you're listening and you're taking notes. So ideally you have that PowerPoint, but then you're also taking notes with it. And then you revisit it. Revisit those notes while they're fresh. I don't know how many times I've taken notes in a class and looked at it later and went, I have no idea what I was trying to say there. So if you look at it while it's fresh and then add a little notes of clarification, when you go back to study that later, it's really, really going to help. And then use your resources, okay? If there is tutoring available to you in a specific area, use it. If you're in a class and they say you can bring your notes, bring them. I am amazed how often students, I'll say, you know what, you can go ahead and outline this essay before you come in and do this, and they just won't do it because they think, oh, I don't need to, or oh, I spaced it off, or whatever. It's like, if you have the opportunity and someone's giving you something that can help you, flip and use it. You know what I'm saying? It's really important. That's part of you advocating for yourself. Organization is another thing that's incredibly important. And it's not just in your academics, it's also just in general. I guarantee you, if you've got a high stakes test that day, you do not want that to be the day that it's taking you longer to get out the door because you can't find X, Y, or Z. I know that when I have something big going on, in fact, I usually try to lay out clothes for myself and for my kids, get their bags together, get my bag together most nights. I'm not perfect about it, but I definitely do it on days that I know it's important that I get out the door at a specific time, or even if it's just a day that I know is going to be particularly stressful for me, because that, I guarantee if I don't, that's going to be the day that my daughter Grace cannot find her shoes anywhere. And I'm telling you, it just makes a better day for everyone. And if you're going in, say you're having this big test that you're nervous about already, and you're a little bit later than you wanted to be, and your anxiety level is also already high because you thought you were gonna miss it, and you've had a fight with your kids or your spouse or whatever. Let's just take that off the board. Be a little bit overly ready that day, and make sure you do what you need and you're not rushed. Another thing is, again, planning, knowing what to do. I had a student, she was in preparing for the nursing program, and they get 3 chances to take the entrance test for nursing, and that's all you get. If you don't get it in those 3 tries, it's like a number of years that you have to wait, and sometimes they don't even grant that option to do it again at all. So she had taken it twice and just missed it. There are 3 areas of it, and she had passed the 2, but she was having trouble with the English and grammar portion. And when you miss one, you have to retake all of them. So she was working with me in the Academic Achievement Center to you know, brush up on the grammar stuff and just kind of get in the right place. But it became really, really obvious fast that this was not just about grammar and her abilities, because she was doing great. So we started talking about her process a little bit. And one thing that she had done for these last 2 tests, at the time, luckily you can now take that test on our Newton campus, but you couldn't then. So she was leaving Newton and driving to Ankeny. She wasn't familiar with the area. She hates the traffic in Ankeny, so do I. And so she didn't know where to park on campus and all that. So the first time she got there about a half hour, 45 minutes early, and just walked in, found the place where she went, and sat and looked at the door. Can you imagine what that half hour, 45 minutes was like, sitting and looking at that door? You know, a lot of people say, oh, I'll get there early and study. That's great. If you feel comfortable being someone who's going to look over notes during that time, that's fantastic. But I will tell you right now, you are not going to get any meaningful studying done in a situation like that. You are going to probably just pile on the anxiety. So the second time she got there, she did pretty much the same thing, just in case there wasn't a place to park, in case whatever. And she had no problem finding parking and everything else. So she went ahead and went in and was early again. So as we talked about how she would do it this third time, we talked about the fact that, you know what, we've established where to park. We know how long it takes to get there. Definitely build in an extra 10 or 15 minutes in case traffic is bad. But don't create a situation for yourself where you are set in a place to heighten that anxiety even further. And so she agreed to that, definitely. And again, as we continued to talk, she really expressed, you know, she said, Jenny, every time I think about going in and taking that test, she says, I think about coming out, and that same woman who's been there the last 2 times, and she's a lovely woman, I know her well, but she said, I imagine coming out of the room and that woman looking at me and saying, I'm sorry, you failed. And she's like, that's all I can think about when I think about taking this test. So I'm like, okay, this is definitely more than just about whether you know your grammar or not. And so she and I started having conversations that were more about mindset, as I've talked about before. If you're not in the right headspace when you walk into those things, you are completely behind the ball already. This is already working against you. So we talked a lot about being cognizant of that self-talk. We are so much better at accepting criticism of ourselves than we are at accepting positive feedback, especially from ourselves to ourselves, okay? So we really talked about countering that negative self-talk with positive self-talk. She's talking about, oh, I'm failing, I'm gonna fail. And then we talked about, well, what have you done to prepare? Do you feel more prepared than you did before? Are you examining the way that you've approached these things before? If you're already doing that, you're in a way, way better position to be successful here. And not to mention, look at the evidence that shows that when a student retakes a test, they automatically tend to do X amount of points better because they're familiar with the test and they're familiar with the testing format. It's like when students take the ACT and they retake it, hardly ever does their score go down, even if they didn't study. Usually just that process of taking the test again, having it not be that first time, helps you out because, like I said, you're familiar with what's being expected of you. You're familiar with the testing format. You already know where to park, where to go, all that good stuff. So while that can be negative too, if you associate too much negativity with it, you can also use that as a positive. I've done this, and I'm more prepared to do it and do it better than I was when I did it before. And also, then we went ahead and had a conversation about visualization. If you can't even imagine being successful at something, the chances of you actually being successful are way, way lower. You have to be able to imagine yourself being successful, okay? So we went through a process. I'm like, all right, let's back this up. Let's visualize, because you're already visualizing over and over in your head again what it's like to fail this test. And unfortunately, you have had that experience, so that's reality for you. But we need to create a new reality. So what I want you to do is imagine going into that room and sitting down at the testing seat and the station and feeling like, okay, let's look at that evidence again. My chances of doing better are higher because I've been here before. I had been working my butt off. She'd been working with me every week. She had a high school age student who was, or child who was working with her. Her husband was quizzing her at night. She was working really hard, and she was in a much better place according to the practice test we were doing than she was when she came in. I'm like, I want you to think about that. I want you to sit down and think about sitting at that testing station and feeling prepared and feeling confident in what you're doing. She's like, okay, that makes sense. So then we went ahead and talked about what it was like to take the test. And do you want to, sometimes you can have a timer up top that says how much time you have left, or you can turn it off. We talked about what felt more comfortable for her. It was a really good conversation. And then I said, all right, let's think about the end of that test. I want you to imagine coming out of that room and the test proctor looking at you and saying, congratulations, you passed the test. And she actually like teared up at thinking about that. I'm like, seriously, I want you to think about that a couple of times, visualize that in your mind. And she did, and she took a few moments to sit with that. And she literally, like, I saw her shoulders just relax. And I'm like, okay, well, that's great and all, but let's make this real. So what else are you going to have to find out? She's like, what do you mean? I'm like, what if you pass this test, what are the next things she's going to tell you? She's like, well, she's going to tell me who's going to receive the test results and when I should expect to hear back from the program and what my next steps were at that time and who I should reach out to and contact. I'm like, yeah, exactly. Those are the things that happen when you're successful and when you go forward. And she's like, okay, it became not just oh my gosh, I can't imagine that, but okay, when that happens, then this, and this are going to happen as well. Okay. And so I could tell when you got her into like task mode, she was fine. And then I'm like, okay, now let's think about celebratory. Like you go back out, you get your car, you get on your phone. Who are you calling? And she's like, I'm going to call my husband. And I'm like, all right, what's that going to be like? And she's like, he's going to be so excited. He's going to take me out for margaritas and pizza. And it's going to be amazing. And she's like, and then I'm going to call my daughter. This is the daughter that had been helping her study. And she she teared up when she talked about it. And it just going through that process and imagining success. Again, we rehearse failure in our minds all the time. We need to consciously make sure that we rehearse success at the same time. Okay, it's so incredibly important. This student did go on to pass her test, and she is now a medical professional in Des Moines. And I think it's so incredibly, and I don't know if it was that, because she, like I said, she really, really, really had way prepared and had gotten way better at the areas that she was having trouble with before. But I really think just her being able to accept her own success made a huge difference for her. So I really, really challenge you all to spend a little time with success every day. Spend a little time looking at what success looks like, because we completely spend time thinking about everything that can go wrong. We need to make sure we spend time with the things that can go right, okay? And just a little side note too, I will tell you, as someone who did always like to be the first one done and get the highest score and do all the stuff like that, and any instructor will tell you the same thing. Those who get done first are not necessarily the ones who do best. That is extremely, extremely true. During our high school completion program that we oversee, when the students go in to take their state tests, which are really high stakes as well, if they get like 45 minutes, if they come out in 27 minutes, we all look at each other and go, holy crap, here we go. Because they are much less likely, if they speed through it, to be done or to do it successfully. So being done quickly does not equate to being done correctly. Now, I know you guys have to deal with time constraints, and that's a very real thing, but when you're in these other settings and somebody speeds through something and hands it in, don't think that necessarily means that they mastered it. One thing that I found in my research is really important was the use of writing about anxiety. And it's something I used to do in my study skills class. Is every Friday the students would take a little bit of time writing about what went well that week, what they were concerned about, and what they still need to work on. And what they found was having that vocabulary to talk about the things that were giving them anxiety and reflecting on them and seeing the difference. I mean, think about you guys. I can't imagine that you feel the same way about your program at the first week as you do at the end of the first semester. You're going to feel so much more comfortable. You know, all of that is so incredibly important. And it's just acknowledging that growth for yourself, I think, is really, really important. Okay, now let's talk about the nuts and bolts a little bit, getting to test day. All right. And again, I've talked about some of this, so I'm going to go through some of it kind of fast. Get there on time and with your materials. Make sure you have everything you need. Okay, and when I say get there on time, a little bit early is good, but as we've talked about, too early can be an issue. Utilize those relaxation techniques. Another thing I haven't even talked about is just breathing technique. It has been shown over and over again that there are physiological changes that help happen in your body and in your mind when you slow your breathing. And that, I'm not saying you have to go sit and meditate or get in a corner and om or anything else like that. Just calming yourself, slowing your breathing, and being present with where you are can make a huge difference. Then, when you get in there, when you have that test in front of you, make yourself familiar with it. Now, for court reporting, this is going to kind of be beforehand, and it goes along with the expectations. Know how it works. Know exactly what that test is going to look like. Know you're going to have this much amount of time, and here's what the teacher is going to expect from you. Knowing that makes a huge difference. If you're in another class where it's like a multiple choice and essay test, look through the whole test, okay? If it's online, if it allows you to, pop through the test and see how many questions there are. Make sure you don't think you're in a good space, and then turn on that last page and find out there are 3 essay questions you have to do and you've got 5 minutes. Know what those expectations are. Again, become familiar with the format. The more you do it, the more you're going to know. And again, think about previous teacher expectations. If you're writing an essay for an instructor and you know that every essay you practiced in class, they wanted that clear intro, body, and conclusion, they wanted multiple paragraphs, whatever, think about those things. That's the instructor telling you what the norms are and what the expectations are. And don't be afraid to ask for clarification. I understand that you can't always get help with tests, but I had a student who the resolution on her screen when she was taking a computer test was off, and she didn't realize until 15 questions in that there was not just A, B, C, and D, but there was also E, and you had to scroll down to it. How many questions did she get wrong because of that? So even though you couldn't get help on the test itself, there was a technical issue that had to be addressed. Not to mention the fact, as someone who has written tests and been in education for 20 years, I don't know how many times I've made mistakes on tests and I didn't know about it until a student brought it to my attention. We are not perfect, we make mistakes, and it's important that if you see something like that, let us know. We as instructors, if we're worth our snuff, we will appreciate that. Strategies now for specific testing, okay? And again, I know that these don't all apply to court reporting, but they will at least apply to other testing situations in which you might find yourself going forward. Multiple choice questions, there's the STEM, that's the prompts. It tells you like kind of what you're going for, and then you have the options. The incorrect answers are the distractors. And the first step is always to rule out all of those obviously wrong answers. Then clearly you're much better off if you're having to choose out of 3 rather than 5. And another thing too is know your options. Read the stem of the question really, really carefully. I don't know how often I've missed questions because I've been rushing through them. Often this happens when you know the material well because you're overconfident, but I will rush through it and realize it isn't what is the thing that they're looking for, but which one of these things is not. So it's really important that you make sure that you're answering the question that they're asking. And is it everything but? Are multiple answers an option? All of those things are really, really important to be really clear on. And then just other things, look for repeated elements. For instance, if you had no idea what the answer to this question was, what 3 US states all have cities called Des Moines? Look at the different options: Florida, New Mexico, and Iowa, Minnesota, South Dakota, and Washington, Iowa, New Mexico, and Washington. You can clearly see that Iowa, New Mexico, and Washington are the ones that are most often an option in these possible answers. So if you truly knew nothing about it at all, that would be a fair guess if you get stuck with that, okay? True, false questions. If you have the ability to write on the test itself, often highlighting keywords or phrases, like what are they really asking me here, can be really good to help you hone in. And be wary of those sweeping always or never questions. We've gotten far enough in life, folks, to know that very few things are always and very few things are never. And that's often a way that they're testing your ability to not overgeneralize information that you've learned. And of course, don't ever leave a multiple choice question blank. You get a 50% chance. Give it a shot, and use your gut instinct if it comes down to that. Matching questions are when you have 1 through 10 over here and A through whatever over here, and then you have to match those things up. First of all, read the directions. What is the basis for the matching? Sometimes it's this is a definition, sometimes this person did this, all of those different things. And how often can options be used? I really, really, really like a 10 of these and 10 of these over here. And you know, then if you know, you've done it right, you could end up naturally occurring on the right answers for the harder ones. But one of the best ways, because those options you get can be distracting, a really good thing to do is cover up those options and then read through the prompts that you have first and ask yourself what you remember and know about those things before you even look at what those options are on the side. That's a great way to jog your memory and get a feel for what's coming forward. Clearly, again, process of elimination, match the easy ones first, the ones you know for sure, and then consider the remaining options from simple, I'm pretty sure I know this, to I'm not quite sure, but I'm going to try and apply this. And when you're done and you have some left over, again, don't you leave an empty spot there. You go ahead and make a guess. Here's something else too. If you're taking an essay test or you're essay writing in any kind of assessment situation, if you get nothing from me today, please know that just like you need scratch paper for a math test, you should have scratch paper for an essay test. If it's telling you you have to answer this question, you need to have intro, body, conclusion, all that good stuff, you can take 2 minutes on a piece of paper, go intro, body, conclusion. Intro, here's my main point that I'm going to talk about. Body, here are my 3 main points. Here's a detail or 2 under each of them. You don't even have to have complete sentences here. And conclusion, I'm going to wrap up those main points, restate them, and leave with a parting thought. Then, as you're writing that essay, that is going to, if you start to veer off this other direction, it's going to help pull you in if you use that. So it allows you to have a skeletal structure that you can address and guide you as you go forward. And again, look for multiple elements of the question. I have had so many students who they'll read through an essay question, they'll go, oh, okay, what was the main point in Arthur Miller's Crucible relating to blah, 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 blah. And they'll go, oh, I know that, but they don't understand. And how did that relate? There's another question there. How did that relate to Arthur Miller's life? And so they're so confident in answering the first part of the question that they skip over and don't realize that they've missed the other part. So make sure that you absolutely do that and read those questions carefully. Now, I'm going to include this for you guys because I want you to understand that I think it is just as much the responsibility of the instructor to make sure that you have the tools that you need to test effectively. So when I talk to instructors about this, I tell them, please be consistent with testing expectations. If something wasn't okay the first week, unless you talk to them about how you want to develop that or whatever, don't suddenly make it okay later. Okay, and actually spend time with your students teaching test-taking skills. In other words, if just like your instructor is doing right now, bringing in someone to talk to you about mindset and how to take tests, because we all have different expectations, we all have different experiences and different philosophies as to how we want to test our students. Let's talk about those. Talk about what the expectations are in your own personal classroom so that students are as well equipped as possible. Also, freshman seminars or things like STV 108, which many of you had to take, that's a great place to learn about testing in the college environment. Same thing with developmental education courses, these study skills courses like I talked about. There are others. It's like students who really need a little bit of help anyway getting comfortable in the classroom setting. This is a great place to talk about those things. Like I said, that most students haven't ever been explicitly taught. So all of us should be talking about assessment, because face it, we all share it. That's one of the most common things in the college experience, is taking tests. Yet we don't spend enough time talking about doing it. And last, I tell the instructors, please write good tests. One of my roles as disability services coordinator is to sit with students and sometimes read them their tests aloud if they have a visual issue or a reading disorder. And I cannot put it into my own words. If a word is misspelled, I have to say exactly the word the way it is. Oh my goodness, have I seen some dog tests, okay? I see spelling errors. I see ambiguous questions that I can't even work out exactly what they're trying to ask. Again, really, really unclear stuff. It's great to be challenging, but you have to be clear. You should ask them for some complex higher order thinking, but you shouldn't ask them you shouldn't be tricky. It shouldn't be a gotcha question, okay? So that is basically the gist of what I wanted to talk to you today about. That's my email. If you want to connect with me, and again, especially in this unusual environment, and ask how we could have a conversation about any of the things that we talked about today, I would be absolutely more than happy to talk to you, or connect you with one of our tutors if you think that's the better thing for you. So basically, and again, if you didn't get that email address, I invite your instructor to share my information with you as well. And just good luck this semester. I'm telling you, it's so important, especially in an unusual situation like this, that we use our resources and we stay connected. And there are so many people who want you to be successful here at DMAC. And I'm just one of many. And if there's anything I can do to help, or if there's anything else you guys need from me, please don't hesitate to reach out. So I hope you have a great day. And thanks for talking today about testing.